thank you both for joining me today as part of this series. Obviously, we're super fortunate to have Studio McGregor as direct neighbours at Here East, as well as sort of, just distant members at the Trampery Fish Island Village, is obviously based in the Olympic Park with us. I love the space that you guys have and the work that you do. Since sort of, April 2017, we're kind of setting up that space in the Olympic Park. And, in terms of people who haven't maybe been to that space, like, how, what are the kind of use cases you've felt for setting up in the Olympic Park and Here East? And how do you see it as a space for, for making and creative practice, collaboration? There's so much that happens there. It'd be great to just hear what you guys see has been the most amazing and exciting things that have happened over the past, 4 or 5 years now.
So I'll jump in with sort of our ideas about why we wanted a space and why Olympic Park and specifically Here East. So as a movement-based organisation, space is obviously critical. We live and work in London, where space is really at a premium, and particularly, big, well-designed space specifically for dance, because dance requires a specific specification. And it's always challenging to find the right kind of space to create in for any length of time. So it's been a dream of ours for many, many years. Studio McGregor sort of originated over 25 years ago, and the idea of having our own space has always been a distant dream that we were able to sort of really progress around the time of the Olympics, and it felt like being part of the Olympic legacy really fit in well with our sort of mission and vision. This idea of being in East London, which is actually where Wayne began as an animateur. So he started his career in East London. So the idea of continuing our sort of presence in that area was appealing, but also just part of this idea of sort of rebirth and regrowth. And then when Here East moved into the Press and Broadcast Centre, that for us was also natural affiliation because of our connections with research and technology and academia, and the idea of Here East, which is about making and creating in its kind of widest context. So that for us was a natural match, even when the ideas of East Bank were first kind of floated, because that did come about before we actually opened our doors. But in fact, although we are delighted that East Bank is happening, we're quite happy really where we are based within Here East, rather than there's just a lot of synergy for us with the organisations. And I'll pass over to Jasmine, because I think some of the things in particular that the space has fulcrumed have really been a lot on the learning and engagement side. Because although, of course, we love having our beautiful space as a home for Wayne and the company, and the studios give us, two studios the size of the Opera House or the Sadler's Wells stage to create on. In fact, the space itself has lent itself to other programs that we would never be able to do if we didn't have our own studio space.
Yeah, so I'll talk a bit about that. I suppose, the biggest change for us is just the idea, the vision that Wayne had when we moved into the building, that it was a home for the company. But we have 3 studios, and it's very rare that we need all of them at the same time. And just one of the values that he's had over the years, and always through the company, but probably wasn't able to realise in such a huge scale, is just sort of sharing assets, knowledge, experience with the wider dance and arts sector, and supporting artists at every stage of their career. I think Wayne always sees, when he looks back over his kind of trajectory as an artist, he always sees himself, at the beginning as an outlier, and had to fight really hard to get support, and has had an amazing support from different organisations over the years, and different kind of individuals as champions in the sector. And I think he felt that actually that was something that he wanted to carry on, and I suppose he's been doing that over the years in terms of mentoring individual artists and setting up artist development programs with other organisations. But we weren't ever able to do that for ourselves because we didn't have the space or the resources. So moving into the building, it was a real opportunity to go, what can we do? What can we do for our wider sector, rather than just kind of closing the doors and going, this is our home. So the kind of flagship program that we started when we moved into the building was Free Space, and that was about giving rehearsal space to artists at really different stages of their career, free of charge, which is kind of no mean feat. You know, the value of our studios is really high. It's probably £2,500 a week, but actually we wanted to really share that, and also because the cost of studio space for artists is so expensive and so can be really prohibitive to making work. So he really wanted to share that resource. So we developed Free Space, which in the first year, the kind of ideal model of Free Space was to give it space to 25 artists at real kind of different stages. So people just graduating from college right up to established dance artists who make their own work for Saddler's Wells and everything in between. And giving them up to 5 weeks of space to do whatever they wanted. So unlike other programs, it wasn't about, okay, this is the space and we want to see what you're doing at the end, or we want to have a proposal to know what you're going to make. You know, the first year was curated by Wayne, so it was artists we kind of knew, but very broad. And then we also had the idea that in exchange for space, that artists would give us, or we would ask them to deliver some kind of learning or engagement activity in return, and that could be in their local community, it could be in our local community, and we called this the barter. So that kind of ran in the first year. I think we gave away around 5,000 hours of space, and it's kind of carried on in various iterations over the years, depending on kind of our financial capacity. You know, this year's not been so great for that, but we're bringing that programme back in. And also just talking about the last year, one of the other things we were able to do that actually we were really brilliantly supported by Here East was to do a programme called Reset, which was about recognising the really dire situation that dance artists were in, particularly really performers. So Free Space is really for dance makers, Reset is really for performers. You know, COVID hit them so hard in terms of all work just completely stopping, and then also the challenge of, you know, for dancers you have to keep yourself in shape, you know, and that's really hard if you're kind of in your bedroom or kitchen trying to do class. There was a lot of online activity. What we were really keen to do with Reset is, as soon as possible, is to get dancers back in the studio. To be honest, it was really about our dancers coming back into the studio and getting back into shape, because at that point we thought they were going to be back working with us, making work in sort of September, October time. October time. So we wanted to do the kind of 10-week program, getting them back into shape. And we worked. Here East were brilliant. They gave us a space on Canal Side that was huge, so that we could have a program that was socially distanced. We could have 18 dancers in working at a time, and we ran that, and it was a training program, so it was 2 dance classes plus physical training, and then we did a series of professional development.
I think that's something that I remember just like walking around Hackney Wick, because I saw that all kind of summer, you know, and it was a time when the area was very quiet, you know, or Here East specifically. Obviously, there's still people living in the area, isn't there? But less workers coming in. But it was something that, you know, was really uplifting just to see that happening like close. And, you know, it wasn't an intrusive thing. It wasn't like I stood and like, you know, whatever. But it was just, I remember that quite vividly. And as soon as you mentioned it, I sort of thought how vital those things I imagine were for people, just in short moments of just sort of a tinge of reality. And obviously for the professionals, it was very important just to stay in shape and engaged, as you say.
I think one of the really interesting things for us was because, you know, the physical side we were aware of, but one of the things that's come out of that moment and out of Reset in particular is the understanding that the freelance community, you know, when the work base falls away, their network no longer exists, because their network is all about going around to the different places they're working and the organizations and people that they are working with. And so what Reset really did for them was provided a network. And so just for them to be able to have people that they were connecting with and talking to, because, you know, unlike those of us who were working from home at that time, you know, we had Teams or Zoom and we were connecting with people. But as dancers, as professional dancers, if you're not dancing, there is no structure to keep in touch. And I think from a mental health perspective, it was really important to have that physical connection and just people to be with and talk to. And I think for Here East as well, it's part of the reason that they, as Jasmine said, wonderfully gave us the space for free, is because of the fact that it did bring life back into the campus and into the space. And it is one of the ways that arts and in particular dance really can help places, become alive again. And that spaces can be brought back to life through the presence of body and art.
Yeah, and I guess it's, thinking about those decades of the company, and obviously, recent in here East as a space, like, when someone, I guess, thinks about your work and how they might engage with it if they live in the area, and maybe they're witness shows, or there's an opportunity to engage in research, or maybe their child, engages in the learning and sort of self-discovery process through movement and things like that. But do you feel like as the year of isolation, distance, and Zooms has, taken over, do you think there is a new, even more of a proposition for this in a place like Hackney Wick and the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which is, it's massive residential as well as a business place, isn't it? So do you feel like the need for more performing arts and spaces like yourselves, and obviously, as you say, Sadler's and others, do you see the use cases even more clear now based off of the year of not having that physical experience?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think there's people are realizing what they've missed. And I think for us, we're currently developing a program, a sort of most of our engagement work has happened outside the building. So as you know, here East is a very particular type of architecture. What was great about Reset is we were in that corner, and it was it's floor to ceiling windows you could see in.
Yeah.
And there is something really beautiful about being able to see that work happening. We don't have that in our building because we're right in the core of the building, and also because we see it as a space for making. So Wayne was very, very clear. Like even within our building, you can't look into the studios unless the choreographer chooses to have the door open, and that's really about people having the choice, because actually some people don't want to have people watching whilst they're making, which is totally understandable. And most of our sort of engagement work in the local community happens outside, because we're trying to kind of build trust and take activity to them. But what we're looking at the moment is developing a studio program where we invite people in to our building and we expose more the creative process and the ideas that are coming out. So we're looking at developing a series of public events that anyone can come to. They'll probably be quite targeted at specific age groups and demographics, but it's really about kind of cracking the building open almost, and just an idea of that it becomes more of a social space. So looking at the kind of models that the V&A and Tate have, where they kind of went beyond a museum, but when actually it's really important that these are social spaces for people to gather together and consume art at the same time. So yeah, we're thinking about that, and I think that is what people want to do. They want social spaces. As we saw during the pandemic, as soon as people could get out and get into parks and just feel like you're together having some kind of communal experience, people were really keen to do that, and I think we've seen that all the way through. So for us, I suppose it's about how do we create that within our building. It's something we haven't done before, and it's really at the kind of early experimental thought stages. But also because we've got this beautiful asset and amazing things happening there, and how can we share that a bit more outside of the dance community? And I'm really thinking about who are the people that live near us. Like even in the last year, not coming into the office and then coming in and going, wow, there's like new flats.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know the numbers of new community that is literally within 30 seconds from our building. Those people don't know we're there. So how do we make ourselves visible to them? And what do they want? So we're doing a big piece of research at the moment, going to local communities, like, what do you want from us as an organisation? What's interesting to you? Do you know who we are? If you don't, this is who we are, and how can we help you, or not help, but how can we mean something to you?
Right. And do you feel like it's different in the sense of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and Hackney Wick? Like there's a rich history there's rich history across all of London, but I think it's an area that's been in flux, hasn't it, for probably a couple of decades, really, since the Olympics, or that's only a decade, but before that as well, with the kind of artist community. And do you feel like that evolving community is like a helpful thing for you guys, like in terms of, you know, as you say, we have a little quiet period or a time at home, we come back, there's so much more residential, and that's a brand new community who maybe doesn't have a stake in the area, but maybe is quite engaged, like, you know, enjoys the arts. Like, do you see that as a benefit, like the kind of mix of community, and like how do you feel like you have to speak differently to the different kind of audiences? Like, how have you found kind of navigating being in the area as a performing arts organization?
Yeah, I think what you just said about speaking differently to audiences, and not in a patronizing way, but just going what's right for you. So, you know, we have a local program which is about making physical movement activity out to different groups, and it has a focus on education and arts and health and well-being. Um, you know, we work in a really specific way with those communities. You know, we build up strong partnerships with community organisations, and we take activity out to them because we're trying to build trust, and it might be new. And then we would do that work and build the trust, and then invite them to come into the building to maybe share the work they've done, or, you know, have a look round or watch work. Because actually we've got to, you know, we've got to do it in a careful way. You can't just, well, we can't open our doors anyway, because we could open our doors, but no one knew our doors were open. But, you know, we can't just open the doors. You've got to build that trust. You've got to have, people have to have a reason to come into our space. So there's that kind of community that may have specific, you know, we might be addressing a specific need, a social need in terms of health and well-being, or socioeconomic, or community cohesion. And then we're thinking, and then we also have our sort of artist or dance community, that might not be kind of completely local, though a lot of them are. So how do we service them? And now we're going, yeah, how do we target residents, you know, this possibly the new kind of community that are really ready to engage with us because they engage with different kind of art forms. You know, how do we do that? So yeah, I think it is about bespoke, and yeah, just listening as well, just making sure that you listen to what people might want or are interested in.
And I think because our history really, you know, our history is as a touring company, and for many years we were based, you know, we had our sort of management team based in an office, and everyone else was out there delivering the work. So, you know, we're very experienced at working with partners and collaborating with people, and you know, adapting what it is we do to different situations. So I think for us, changing communities and finding the ones and how to respond to them, I mean, that's the history of what we do. So a changing community and learning new and different ways to work with our partners is, you know, that's what we get, you know, that's where our passion and so on comes from. So yeah.
Yeah, it feels quite natural. And I guess there's a, you know, for us, like a big focus is on kind of health and well-being, which is not necessarily, I guess, when, you know, someone thinks of an office or a workspace or whatever it might be, or a studio, you know, it's not innately probably what they're thinking about first and foremost. But I think that's the core thing for us, is realizing it's the perfect place, because where do you spend a massive chunk of your life? And, you know, where do you probably less think about that when really you should be thinking about it more? But, you know, how do you see it from, you know, obviously you're working with creative professionals, with young people, lots of different people, researchers, you know, technicians. Like, how do you see a space and the performing arts generally as like do you see it as a vehicle to kind of, you know, push those things more, like, you know, making sure people's balances are right and they're looking after their mental and physical well-being? Obviously the physical well-being is so important, and as a creative person, I know that the creative outlet of working on your art is super, you know, is essential for your mind. But is that something that you guys think about as you're working all the time with new people and different projects? Is it health and well-being a big focus?
Yeah, I suppose for us, what we talk about in our work is unlocking individual creative potential. And that's, I mean, it's really interesting, the whole health and well-being and the arts, because it's such a huge movement now. And I think it's really amazing. But I also have slightly conflicting feelings in terms of over instrumentalizing the arts, and yeah, not necessarily appreciating the intrinsic value of it. But I think it's always been something we've done, and now it's something that everybody is being pushed into, and it is really great. And, you know, it's finally recognizing, but I suppose I just want to be really careful that we're not doing things too people. I think that's a real kind of risk with that kind of work, and that's where the partnership work comes in.
And I think there's this idea of sort of physical intelligence and physical potential that we talk about a lot, which is the idea that that your body is your whole body. And, you know, in this context of office and so on, a lot of people think, you know, start thinking and feeling just from head up and brain and head up. And we've always been proponents of this idea that actually by learning how to use your whole physical being, it can inform your experience and inform your creative process. And your creative process is a creative process no matter what it is that you do. And just by using your body and exploring your physical creative potential, you are pushing forward your ways of thinking and so on. So it is about health and well-being, but maybe not necessarily, and this is sort of the tradition of what we have always done and how we've always worked, but it's not how, you know, when you think about health and well-being and arts and physical activity, of course there's a really basic connection, and of course we believe that people should be up and moving, and, you know, all of that, that's, you know, that's kind of a given. But, you know, but actually what we really like to focus on and delve into is this idea of actually how if you think about the body in a particular way, how can that really evolve and develop your creative potential as an individual in whatever, you know, and then use that sort of scheme work or, you know, a different way of thinking to be able to push forward your thinking in, you know, whether it's maths or science or, you know, not just dance or visual art or something like that.
Yeah, I love that, because when I read that about the thinking through and with the body, you know, I think that's such a, and have you seen that, you know, in that work with the, I know obviously the youth engagement side is so important, and that's why both of you on the call, you know, but have you seen it, I don't know anecdotally or how you track it, but like, you know, does it infiltrate into other areas? Like, is it as you're saying, like a broader improvement of understanding?
I think it is difficult, because it is one of those things that
exactly.
How do you track it? It's very hard to track. And I think, you know, something that Jasmine's actually really keen on doing is always trying to find ways to measure when we are working with people. How do you measure what you do? But it's tricky, it's difficult, because there's not an immediate feedback or, you know, immediate result that you can, you know, that you can tangibly, you know, show somebody. And yet intrinsically, I think, you know, we believe, and we do have anecdotal stories that definitely we believe it's helpful. But Jasmine probably can be more specific than me on that.
Yeah, it's always interesting, that kind of measuring an impact, and obviously there's loads of scientific ways, and there's sort of, and also again it comes back to who you're working with and who you're trying to measure. So there's things like the Warwick Wellbeing Scale. There's loads of measurement tools. And one thing I think we have to get better at in the arts, and in particular dance, is the building of kind of sort of statistical data, and that's really hard. We have loads of anecdotal data and amazing stories, but actually what we're trying, you know, not to get too political about it, but a lot of the time, you know, where we're trying to prove our case to fundraise or, you know, position ourselves in terms of the value of the arts, we don't have enough of that hard data, because it's really hard to capture, and also because everybody's experience is really individual. But it's definitely moving forward, all of that. So we've been involved in some programs that are with Hackney, which are around social prescribing. So that's kind of one area that we're moving into, where you know, it's a big movement and it's fairly new, but it is developing, where it's looking kind of more holistically at this idea that you can treat, you know, you can prevent things like mental health issues, or even, you know, some kind of conditions that affect people physically through engagement in the arts, or, you know, not medication basically, but it could be gardening or joining a library or being bigger part of your community, and that is actually, you know, being used by GPs as a preventative or curative measure for mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're really interested in that, and yeah, there's some really interesting programs around bringing together arts professionals and health professionals to make that happen. But I think it's interesting what you're saying about the workplace, because I think, you know, some of us who work for our organisation have dance backgrounds, but maybe don't move as much as we used to. So I think actually we're not brilliant at like sort of, you know, we sort of talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk for ourselves. And actually during lockdown, we've done it a bit more, trying to kind of, because we've been having sort of morning meetings, and we've done a few yoga sessions and exercise sessions, but that is the first time, you know, that we've done that kind of thing, which I think is interesting, because we're not pushing it within our own workforce, even though we know what the benefits are.
Maybe we could help. Maybe that's where we could come in. You can help us to dance and we can go the other way. But I guess you sort of mentioned, don't want to get political, and, you know, feel free to not want to answer this because it might go into certain territory you don't want to. But, you know, I think, you know, it just made me think about how the sort of, I guess, the performing arts has been sort of managed or looked at over the past 15 months now. And strangely, it reminded me of that leaflet, the post the Brexit agreement about, you know, that girl, I can't remember, she should get into cyber. What was it? I can't remember
Fatima,
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think she was in a ballet. She was like curled up in a position, right? Yeah. So again, like how that was envisioned, how that was presented as an idea, you know, like what that person's life's work could be adjusted to suit another career, you know, just the way that's kind of been looked at. And I guess, you know, we've been in a very difficult time, and I'm sure, you know, you've had many conversations with artists and performers, and, you know, that have been probably heartbreaking, haven't they? And, you know, and I'm sure you've all come together in such an amazing way to support each other. And I guess, do you feel like, you know, coming out, that I guess you can't speak for the whole community of the performing arts, but, you know, but for your circle, like how do you see the kind of sector coming out of this experience, and, like, you know, what are the, I guess, the lessons learned that you think will help drive forward in a more positive way, and what things will we leave behind? Like, I don't know if there's anything really that comes to mind there. That's a very broad question and not something I really planned for, but.
Well, I'll jump in to say, first of all, that without shadow of a doubt, you know, in the biggest possible way, if we had not had government support over the last, you know, additional government support over the last, you know, year or so, we would not have survived. So the culture, we have been part of the cultural recovery programs that came through the Arts Council from DCMS, and those have been a complete and absolute lifesaver. So that you know, that goes without question. I think what has been very interesting is that we are an organization that is made up probably about 50% of employed staff and freelance staff, and so having to understand what impact that the COVID and furlough and SEISS has had on those individuals has meant that we really have understood the great inequity between employed individuals and freelancers, and that's one of the things that we've really sort of swung behind over the last year and a half, and really tried to do what we can to highlight the plight of freelancers, to really jump into whatever programs we can. We've been very involved in the official sort of organizations that have been meeting and trying to highlight these situations and try to improve conditions and so on. So that's something that we definitely have been very aware of, feel very strongly about, and are continuing to lead in that arena. So that's definitely, so the plight of the freelancers. I think arts organizations are in a uniquely difficult position, because even when we do all open up again in a couple of weeks, you know, in the best case scenario, we are not bringing our company back until the end of this year, because we will be the very last part of the economy to recover. All, you know, the theatres have to open up. They have to figure out what they're doing first before they're ready to understand how they're going to cope with artists. So the touring landscape is incredibly difficult inside the UK. Most theatres have been closed for much of the last year and a half. And so what does that mean to them and their coffers, and how is it they're going to be able to bring artists in? We as a touring company are completely dependent on the ability to be able to move around the world very swiftly. Brexit is going to, you know, and all of the issues that have been thrown up around touring and the difficulties with touring and visas and carnets and so on is going to be problematic. We always knew that, but you know, that combined with COVID and quarantine and vaccines and amber, red countries. I mean, it's all going to be extremely complicated. And honestly, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work and how we're going to cope with it. But there's a lot of positive energy out there. We are now working with our international partners about what does happen starting in January 2022. And there's a lot of interest and excitement and possibilities. So I am positive. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work. It won't be the same as it was before, but I think, we are an established organization. We're very lucky in that way. We have our partnerships. People are used to working with us. I really worry about organizations that are less established, some of the younger, less established artists, less well-known artists coming up. How is that going to work for them? The models are very precarious at the best of times, and it's really, really tricky. So that's not too. Having said that, I think that there's quite a lot. For ourselves, we've always had a big focused interest in technology. That does not mean that we've spent the last 18 months putting stuff online, because that's not the same thing. But I think we're really excited and interested about how the world has now embraced technology and what that means to how we will doing it. And Jasmine's starting to spearhead a new program that we're going to be running, which is about how do we investigate not sort of Zoom as a platform for sharing dance, but actually technology is so much better and deeper and greater and broader, and how can we create a multi-layered way to be able to share arts, and not just our art but also everybody else's art, particularly the art of people who come into our studio. How is it that we can develop new and different technologies that are much better at presenting the content that we're all creating? So I think that's an exciting thing to come out of this moment. It's an area that we've always been interested in, but now everybody else is also interested in figuring out what that could be as well. Jazz, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I mean, I suppose just with the tech and people embracing online engagement, it's just about reach. Some of the good things that have come out is that you can increase your reach. You can reach groups or individuals who may not, who may have difficulty accessing activity otherwise. So I think that's interesting to explore. And we've been delivering some projects internationally that we wouldn't be able to do normally, because the finances just don't allow for that on either side. But really successfully engaging with different dancers and students around the world with interesting projects. But we want to make it better so that the delivery mechanism is more interactive, it's easier to use, that it's not such a passive experience for the viewer, so it's they have more control over what they're looking at. So I think the future's really interesting in terms of that.